of 20, 20 of 20, the Dark Mother, the Dark Mother, the Dark Harvest, the Dark Harvest, James, 20 of 20, James, the Dark Harvest.
August 25th, 1951. I disembarked at Andrews Air Force Base, the Maryland twilight casting distended shadows across the tarmac that seemed to writhe when glimpsed peripherally. Two men awaited me, identical charcoal suits, expressionless faces. Not the vacant stare of those who'd witnessed cosmic horror, but the calculating gaze of men driven by ambitions as unfathomable as the ancient beings themselves. Colonel Weaver, the package, if you please, the taller one stated flatly. I relinquished the container with strange reluctance. As it left my possession, I felt some tenuous psychic tether severed, both liberating and oddly bereft. "You will accompany us, Colonel," the man pronounced. "There are questions which must be addressed." Our destination was a nondescript building on Bethesda's outskirts. Behind its bureaucratic facade lay a subterranean complex accessed through an elevator concealed behind a maintenance closet. We descended far beyond rational expectation, pressure changes causing discomfort to both ear and mind. Finally reaching its terminus, the doors opened to reveal a concrete corridor lit by shadowless fluorescent lights, an unnatural absence that heightened, rather than diminished, my mounting dread. At the corridor's terminus, we encountered twin doors adorned with inscriptions of such geometric precision and antiquity that the eye, following their patterns, experienced a subtle vertigo. These opened silently upon our approach, revealing a chamber wherein three men sat equidistant around a circular desk of obsidian aspect. The trio wore silver-hooded cloaks that momentarily evoked ecclesiastical associations, as though the Catholic Church had dispatched members of some arcane papacy for an exorcism of unprecedented gravity. Yet closer observation dispelled this impression. Their garments bore symbols that no Vatican conclave would sanction, and they carried themselves with an authority suggesting they answered to powers beyond any earthly church. The table, though superficially resembling polished stone, possessed qualities that defied terrestrial geology, its surface absorbing rather than reflecting the harsh institutional lighting, creating an impression of boundless depth. More disturbing still were the symbols inlaid upon its circumference, which began to emit a faint luminescence as the container approached, pulsing with the unmistakable rhythm of a living heart. One of my escorts unsealed the case and withdrew the specimen jar, a seamless glass vessel devoid of any discernible opening, as though the vitreous material had been somehow formed around its contents in defiance of conventional craftsmanship. Within, suspended in clear fluid, rested a fragment of that which I had witnessed in Pont-Saint-Esprit, a thing that should not exist in our reality. I maintained a rigid military bearing, decades of discipline preventing outward displays of the disquiet that threatened to overwhelm my faculties. Yet beneath this practiced composure, fundamental certainties were rapidly eroding, not merely regarding the specimen's impossible nature, but concerning these men who regarded it with such clinical detachment. Their identities remained obscure, yet their authority was absolute, suggesting a power structure operating in parallel to, yet separate from, the governance I had sworn to serve. None of these robed figures offered introductions or appellations, not even the courtesy of falsified identities to establish some pretense of conventional dialogue. Such trivial social formalities seemed beneath their concern, as though they operated in a sphere where human protocols were vestigial remnants of a reality they had long transcended. The atmosphere within that chamber pulsed with a palpable chaos, not the disordered chaos of randomness, but something primal and purposeful that resonated at frequencies just beyond human perception. My thoughts seemed to drift untethered, fragmenting into voids between coherence, until the central figure broke the oppressive silence. He spoke without apparent movement of lips beneath his silver hood, his voice manifesting directly within the chamber, as though air itself reluctantly formed his words. 20 of 20? A pause, pregnant with cosmic significance. The Dark Mother. Another pause, during which I felt reality constrict around us. The Dark Harvest. Then, with an intimacy that violated something deeper than mere privacy, he addressed me not by rank or surname, but by a name I had abandoned to military formality decades prior. James. Mine own baptismal appellation, falling from that nameless entity's unseen lips, struck upon my consciousness with a violence surpassing any corporeal assault, a transgression more intimate and profound than the most invasive espionage could achieve. Within that singular utterance lay irrefutable evidence that these presences, for I could no longer sustain the comforting delusion that they were men in any sense comprehensible to our species, possessed knowledge of my being that transcended the boundaries of governmental archives and military ledgers, extending perhaps into realms where the very essence of identity is laid bare beneath the cold scrutiny of inhuman perception. The central figure's continued discourse emanated not from any discernible orifice beneath its argent cowl, but seemed rather to originate from some unfathomable point in space coincident with, yet not precisely located within, the physical form before me. Your faculty of intuition serves you faithfully, James. The syllables manifested not as auditory phenomena, but as preternatural reverberations within the labyrinthine architecture of my cranial vault, each word a sepulchral echo awakening dormant chambers of sensation heretofore unknown to me. The companion of doubt shall render you no succor in this sphere, and as for truth, here the entity's utterance underwent a hideous modulation, ascending and descending through tonal registers that no terrestrial larynx could produce, generating infinitesimal ruptures in the very substance of reality between us. A caesura that expanded like some vast cosmic maw, threatening to devour all epistemological certainty within its lightless depths. Truth begets consequences more dire than your finite mind can encompass. The figure inclined slightly forward, its hooded vestment capturing and refracting illumination at angles, which violated the fundamental principles of optics, revealing prismatic colorations that could not possibly exist within the uniform phosphorescence of that chamber. A profound stillness descended upon the assembly, as though the very molecules of air had momentarily ceased their eternal motion. When the central entity resumed its communication, The psychic impact of its words struck my consciousness with such force that I staggered physically, my military bearing momentarily abandoned. "You bear her mark now, James Weaver," the entity intoned, each syllable a serpentine vibration that coiled through the interstices of my mind. "The black goat of the woods, with 1,000 young she who walks among the stars, the mother of absolute chaos. Her unfathomable awareness now encompasses your infinitesimal existence." My knees threatened to buckle as comprehension bloomed like some malignant flower within my understanding. The dreams that had plagued me since Pont-Saint-Esprit, visions of cosmic voids populated by writhing geometries and pulsating organic architectures that defied Euclidean principles. These were not mere psychological reactions to trauma, but something far more sinister, direct perceptions of an alien consciousness that had somehow entangled itself with my own. From the moment her transformed children recognized you as messenger, from the instant that recognition passed between your consciousness and theirs, an indelible connection was established. The entity's cowl inclined toward the specimen jar, which now pulsated with a bioluminescence that seemed synchronized with my own heartbeat. And in delivering this fragment of her essence, this precious distillation of her manifestation, you have completed a circuit of exchange. You have participated, however unwittingly, in a transaction of cosmic significance. I recalled with sickening clarity the bizarre synchronicity with which the transformed victims had turned toward me in that French containment facility, their distorted voices merging in uncanny harmony to address me directly. The messenger has come. Not a misidentification, as I had desperately wished to believe, but a recognition of a role I had been unconsciously assigned in some vast, incomprehensible drama. "She observes you now, James Weaver," the entity continued, its telepathic emanations carrying undertones of what in a human interlocutor might have suggested reverence or perhaps envy. "Through the dimensional membranes that separate your reality from hers, her attention has fixed upon your particular neurological constellation. The dreams you experience represent merely the most rudimentary manifestations of this surveillance, the barest filaments of her consciousness brushing against yours, causing ripples in your perception that your brain desperately attempts to contextualize through familiar cognitive frameworks. The implications of this revelation cascaded through my consciousness with devastating force. The entity was suggesting not merely that I had been observed or selected, but that I had been fundamentally altered, that my very being now served as a permeable membrane through which an incomprehensible cosmic entity maintained awareness of our dimension. The specimen jar, with its imprisoned fragment of that which had transformed the citizens of Pont-Saint-Esprit, seemed suddenly to radiate malevolence, not as an inert biological sample, but as a living extension of something vast and hungry, something for which human consciousness represented not a mystery to be respected, but a resource to be harvested. Then, by some mad impulse, as though a long-dormant fragment of my soul had issued a final, desperate declaration of rebellion against these overwhelming cosmic horrors, I found myself forfeiting all cowardice and despair. The accumulated military discipline of decades abruptly reasserted itself, and I drew myself to full height. "Stop!" I roared, my voice shattering the oppressive atmosphere with unexpected violence. "No more!" The hooded figures remained motionless, yet I sensed a perturbation in the psychic atmosphere. Perhaps surprise, though I hesitate to ascribe human emotional categories to entities so manifestly alien. Whatever you or whoever is responsible for the deliberate murders of innocent lives, I continued, my voice gaining solidity with each word. I am not part of this and never will be. And whatever this dark mother is, here I gestured contemptuously toward the specimen jar, its contents now writhing with apparent agitation. For I know one thing with absolute certainty. You are confessing in plain language to the cultivation of a biological weapon administered on our allies. My rational faculties, so long subdued by metaphysical terror, reasserted themselves with unexpected clarity. The elaborate cosmological framework presented by these entities, dimensional membranes, cosmic cycles, eldritch deities, suddenly struck me as an elaborate obfuscation of mundane, if horrific, reality. If I had my weapon with me, I declared with cold precision, you would be lying flat on this floor. So tell me this, after all these formalities, are you intending to pin this atrocity on me? Have me believe an alien being orchestrated this abomination? This specimen is nothing more than a mutated virus your organization has created as an apparatus of biological warfare, dressed up in fairy tales to manipulate my perception. The absurdity of my defiance in such circumstances was not lost on me, yet I pressed onward, driven by a desperate need to reassert human agency in the face of overwhelming cosmic indifference, or perhaps merely to construct a more comprehensible narrative than the one presented. You do realize, I concluded, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, that if I leave this place, I will bring down the full might of the United States military upon your heads. My declaration hung in the air, its bold insolence seeming to ripple through the chamber's oppressive atmosphere. I anticipated some display of anger, perhaps even retribution for my impudence. Instead, after a prolonged silence that seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of normal temporal perception, the central hooded figure merely adjusted its posture, settling back into a position of disconcerting ease that suggested not alarm but something far more unsettling, a profound cosmic patience. If that is what you believe the truth to be, Colonel Weaver, the entity replied, its voice now modulated to more closely approximate human intonation, an adjustment that somehow struck me as more condescending than conciliatory, then you are indeed free to depart this assemblage. The casual dismissal of my threats produced in me a surge of indignation, quickly supplanted by confusion as the entity continued. However, I would counsel you to remember this date and this encounter with particular attentiveness, it continued, the measured cadence of its words carrying the inexorable weight of prophecy rather than threat. In 1971, these events shall recur. The cycle progresses with mathematical precision, indifferent to human belief or disbelief. A peculiar disorientation overtook me at these words, not the vertiginous terror that had characterized my earlier responses to the entity's pronouncements, but rather a cold, analytical dread born of the statement's specificity. Why 1971? Why precisely 20 years hence? The arbitrary yet confident precision of this prediction disturbed me more profoundly than any cosmic philosophy. Most curious of all, the figure concluded, its cowl inclining toward me with what I can only describe as perverse amusement. You yourself shall occupy the position I now hold. You shall sit where I now sit, and you shall impart these identical revelations to the next messenger, who will respond with equivalent skepticism to that which you now display. Something in me snapped at this pronouncement, this casual assertion of my predetermined role in their cosmic charade. Military training had instilled in me a fundamental belief in human agency, in the capacity to make decisions and alter outcomes through force of will. This prophecy represented the antithesis of such conviction. If you're so certain of yourself and these predictions, I challenged, my voice steadier than I felt, why hide your face in such obscurity? Why not show me who, or what, you truly are? The hooded figure remained motionless for several seconds, its silvery cowl directed toward me with an intensity I could feel despite the absence of visible eyes. Then, with deliberate slowness, it tilted its head, a gesture so eerily familiar that it sent a premonitory shudder through my frame before I could consciously identify its significance. "Of course," the figure replied, its telepathic voice modulating into tones that awakened an awful recognition within me. "If you want to see, then see you shall." Those precise words, "then see you shall," struck me with paralyzing force. They were the exact phrase Dumont had uttered before leading me into the French containment barracks, before exposing me to the horror that initiated this nightmare. The statistical impossibility of such identical phrasing momentarily overwhelmed my analytical faculties, creating a cognitive vacuum into which poured a flood of terrible suspicion. With ceremonial deliberation, the figure raised hands clad in silver-hued gloves to the edges of its hood. As the fabric was drawn back, revealing the face beneath, the fundamental architecture of my comprehension collapsed entirely. There, regarding me with eyes that contained both recognition and unfathomable alienness, sat Dumont. Not Dumont as I had known him in France, the exhausted, haunted intelligence officer whose humanity had been evident even in his horror. But Dumont transformed. His features retained their basic structural identity, yet were subtly altered in ways that defied precise cataloging. His skin possessed a quality simultaneously desiccated and unnaturally vital, as though organic tissue had been replaced, with some substance that mimicked life without truly embodying it. His eyes, once merely haunted, now contained depths that suggested consciousness extending far beyond the physical confines of his skull. In that moment of recognition, as the implications of this revelation began their catastrophic cascade through my consciousness, the chamber, the obsidian table, Dumont's transformed visage, all were abruptly occluded by absolute darkness, as though reality itself had been extinguished. Cold droplets striking my face penetrated the void of unconsciousness, each impact a minute shock drawing me incrementally toward awareness. Through the darkness came a voice, distant at first, then gaining clarity with persistent repetition.
Jamais, jamais, jamais. You must get up, jamais. Quickly now, jamais.
The familiarity of that voice triggered an autonomic response, my military training compelling a return to consciousness, despite the mind's instinctive retreat from whatever horrors awaited. I opened my eyes with reluctance born of recent memory, my vision gradually resolving from indistinct shapes into a face hovering above mine, a face that caused my heart to seize with momentary terror. Dumont. Not the transformed entity whose revelation had preceded my blackout, but Dumont as I had known him in France, haggard, human, his features etched with apparent concern rather than cosmic detachment. Rain streamed down his face, plastering his hair to his forehead as he leaned over me. "You must get up," he urged, his French accent more pronounced than I recalled, perhaps exacerbated by evident anxiety. "Quickly, James." Before I could formulate response or question, darkness claimed me once more, not the instantaneous void of my previous experience, but rather the gradual dissolution of consciousness that suggests ordinary syncope. The image of Dumont's worried countenance lingered briefly, then dispersed like smoke in a strong breeze. My second emergence into consciousness was more gradual. I became aware first of the persistent rhythm of rainfall, heavy droplets striking my exposed skin with metronomic regularity. Then came the subtle motion beneath me, not the solid stability of the chamber floor, but something that yielded slightly, accompanied by a faint grinding sound with each shift of my weight. When I finally managed to open my eyes, I beheld not institutional lighting, but the boundless canopy of a night sky, occluded by roiling storm clouds, intermittently illuminated by distant lightning that transformed the suspended raindrops into momentary constellations of falling light. I sat upright with effort, my sodden uniform adding considerable weight to movements already hampered by disorientation. My surroundings refused immediate classification. I found myself perched upon a massive, flat-topped rock formation that protruded from what appeared to be a shoreline. The stone beneath me was not the polished obsidian of that subterranean chamber, but rough granite, slick with rainwater and occasional splashes from nearby waves.
Final report of the commercial starship Nostromo. Third officer reporting. The other members of the crew, Kane, Lambert, Parker, Brett, Ash, and Captain Dallas, are dead. Cargo and ship destroyed. I should reach the frontier in about 6 weeks. With a little luck, the network will pick me up. This is Ripley, last survivor of the Nostromo. Signing off.